and we are here for the final chapter, the chapter that is officially called Misrepresentation of Psychology, but which I like to call the Defensiveness chapter, because in this chapter we're going to discuss all the ways in which psychology gets misrepresented and sort of maligned. So let's dive in. So first off, let's talk about this concept called paranormal psychology. First off, it has the word psychology in it, so we're already kind of tied to this kind of topic. Paranormal means to study the things that are not typical or that are not part of average experience, but that surrounds average experience. So, for example, ESP. You guys might be familiar with different kinds of ESP. I just made a small list of different things that could be considered ESP, right? You've got clairvoyance, where you can see things without having to actually be there and have them collected through your eyes. ESP, by the way, stands for extrasensory perception. And so what it literally means is that you're able to perceive things without them having to come in through your senses. So with clairvoyance, I don't have to actually see it with my eyes. I can just see it with my mind. And so I can see that murder that was committed, 3 states over, just with my mind. Telepathy, where you can actually share your thoughts with somebody else, send messages, just mentally. Precognition, something before it happens. I actually have some ESP tricks that I like to show in class, but I'm not going to put them on the internet because people get really mad if you share the secrets to some of these tricks. But let's just put it this way. I'm able to display what appears to be clairvoyance, telepathy, and precognition, but they're all completely explainable through a series of tricks that actually are really hard to guess. Like, generally people don't guess the actual strategy that I'm using. They actually come up with much more complex answers to how I'm doing it. And so it's kind of easy to convince people that you have some kind of extrasensory perception because our, things we've talked about in class before, right? Our ability to use our logic's a little bit weak, right? And so when attempting to explain how the ESP was displayed, we don't come up with the solution that actually is the solution that caused that appearance of clairvoyance or that appearance of telepathy or whatever. So I won't do it here because I don't want to get in trouble with the other people who might want to, continue to trick people. But just let me tell you, if I can pull off, I'm going to use another concept from earlier in the textbook. If I can do it, it's a pretty simple thing to do these tricks. So I'm just going to leave it there. But ESP has words in it that us psychologists study. Sensory, right? We study sensation. Perception, we study perception. So psychologists are very interested in whether it's true that you can perceive things without that information having to come in through your senses. And in fact, you read that article by Daryl Bem talking about the study of paranormal issues. We want to study these issues because what if they are real? Like, just the fact that I can do a trick doesn't mean that there aren't people who actually have clairvoyance or telepathy or precognition or one of the other kinds of ESP. Just because I have a trick that can mock it up doesn't mean that these aren't real things. And so as scientists, we want to find out, are they real? And so psychologists, oftentimes like Daryl Bem, will study paranormal psychology questions. And a lot of times people think that if we're studying it, it must be because we know it's real. And that's not the leap that we should encourage people to go to, right? We shouldn't, just because we're studying it doesn't mean that we know it's real. If we knew it was a real phenomenon or something, we wouldn't need to study it to find out if it's real. Notice the circle, right? But good scientists want to find out whether, unusual things are in fact earthly explainable things. So we sort of get caught up in people talking about ESP as if we're giving it our stamp of approval. Something else that falls into the category of paranormal psychology would be past life regression therapy. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but the idea is that if you have got psychological blocks or issues right now. It might be because something in one of your previous lives has sort of caused or triggered this block. And a lot of times it'll manifest itself in depression or anxiety. And if we can go back into your previous life, the idea is, and figure out what the trauma or the blocking factor was, or the trigger was, whatever it is. If we can go back into your previous life and track down the problem, then we can work through it, and your present life, your life that you're living right now, will be better in the long run. So there are a lot of things going on that we need to unpack with this past life regression therapy, isn't it? One, you clearly have to assume that there are, that one soul lives more than one life, right? You're going to have to sort of believe that. Psychologists are sort of, as a field, we have two ways of looking at the idea of whether souls go on to live another life. There's what we call the monists, who say that our soul or our mind or whatever you want to call it is just a function of our physical body. And so when our physical body shuts down, so does the soul or the mind, right? That it's really just a manifestation of our brain waves and things like that. And so when our brain shuts down, so goes our mind or our soul. The other group of psychologists would be what we call dualists, who believe that your mind and your body are separate. And so it's possible for your body to die and for your soul or your psyche or something to live on. Most psychologists are in the monist category, but there are some psychologists that are on the dualist side. Either way, the idea that some people are encouraging individuals to get past life regression therapy as a way to improve their current life is something that psychologists are interested in. Like, maybe we want to find out that it really doesn't work, and we could maybe try and debunk it and try to discourage people from following this kind of therapeutic technique, show it to be false so that people won't rely on it anymore. Or on the other hand, we might discover that there's evidence for it, right? So we study it to try and find out what it does. I found this on the Oprah magazine website. By traveling back into my past life, I rediscovered my love for books and writing. I thought that was such an interesting experience to have after having gone back into a past life. Oh, that's right. I do love books and writing. Usually you hear about people going into their past life and finding out that they were a soldier, and that's why they have, this PTSD kind of symptom or something like this. But this person learned, oh my gosh, I like books and writing. It's a really popular notion that people can, be regressed and find out what their life was like in the past. My mom's friend had this done and discovered that she was Anne Boleyn in a previous life. In case you're saying, who's that? I did too. I had to look it up. Apparently she was one of Henry VIII's wives. I think she was beheaded for not producing a boy child. But the issue isn't really like exactly who my mom's friend was regressed to be. It's that so often when people experience a past life regression, treatment, when they discover their past life, they were somebody important in their past life. Now, what's the statistical probability that any one of us living today was actually somebody important, famous, powerful in our past life? Like, let's just take for granted that you had a past life or several. Let's just take that for granted. Let's then try and figure out statistically what is the probability that you were somebody famous or somebody powerful in that past life. I'm going to go with the same kind of probability you have right now of being somebody famous or important in this life. Right? I mean, the probability is low. So what's the likelihood that my mom's friend was Anne Boleyn in a previous life? Pretty small. I'm going to go with probably she wasn't. If she had a past life, probably. But how often do people have past life regressions that produce information that they were somebody famous or somebody powerful instead of being a slave or a farmer or one of just the nameless rebel that history didn't take note of, right? I mean, so we study past life regression therapy in case we can find evidence for it. We also try and study it to find out what kinds of claims are being made by past life regression therapists so that maybe we can attempt to refute some of the things that they say. Because remember, I'm going to pull it all together for you guys. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning when I remind you of Occam's razor, right? The simplest explanation should be assumed to be true. So it is a much simpler explanation to say that you are currently living your first life, your only life. It's a much more complex argument to say that you have lived before and that we should be able to find evidence of your previous life experience. The onus is on the person making that claim. Like, that's a pretty radical claim, and they need to provide support for it. The onus is not on us to show how that's not true as much as it is on them to show that it is true. So as psychologists, a lot of our effort is going to be devoted to trying to convince people not to put too much emphasis on this kind of treatment and things like that, because there's just really no evidence to support it. It really is the past life regression therapist's job to show evidence that people live multiple lives and things like that. But they probably aren't taking that job too seriously. So psychologists oftentimes are going to be the ones who are going to be trying to refute their own belief and looking for evidence that past life regression is real, right? Because if the psychologist's belief is that it's not, they should be looking for the opposite of that. Because remember, falsification. So we should try and look for evidence that we're wrong rather than evidence that we're right. So psychologists are interested in these questions. How about hypnotherapy? Now, this is a topic that I need to be super careful with, because there are a lot of psychologists and therapists and counselors of all sorts who use hypnosis in their practice. So I'm talking about hypnotherapy. Here's a nice stereotype. You've got the client laying on the couch and you've got the therapist, swinging a watch, and that's going to somehow hypnotize them. That's all, just very much of a, caricature of how hypnosis is conducted. But notice this Therapy Tribe website that I found. It says research suggests that hypnosis may provide a wide range of benefits for a multitude of psychological, physical, and behavioral issues and conditions. That's kind of overstating what the research has shown, but researchers have been interested in hypnosis since Freud started to use it as a way of accessing the unconscious. So a good solid 100 years that psychologists have been interested in what is hypnosis. We talked about that already in class. What is this thing that we're talking about? And then assuming that it exists and not even really caring what exactly it is, because we're not essentialists, right? We're going to go ahead and come up with an operational definition of hypnosis, and we're going to try and study it and try and figure out exactly what it can and can't do. This little statement that I provided here kind of implies it can do a lot. But what the research has actually shown is that it can do some things. Like, it can be helpful for pain management. Research has shown that it can help with a person who's getting dental treatments. They can sort of use hypnosis to combat that pain and actually not experience it. They sort of experience it like from a third person perspective. So it's still there, but it's not, it's tolerable. It seems to work well for a very motivated person who's trying to quit smoking. It can kind of give them that last little bit of ability to withstand deprivation from nicotine and stuff. Like, it can help, but it absolutely, if you don't want to quit smoking, being hypnotized and being told that you're not going to smoke anymore will do absolutely nothing to your smoking behavior. Same thing with weight loss. It can be that last little bit of, like self-regulating kind of self-control that you need to be able to monitor what you're eating or whatever, but it cannot do it by itself. So it can help with weight loss. It can help with smoking cessation. It can help with pain management. What I really wanted to focus in on is, can it really help with things like depression or anxiety? I know that it works really well with panic attacks, that a person can be in a full-blown panic attack where they think, literally, this time I am going to die from this. And through hypnotic treatments, they can actually calm down, breathe regularly, and actually, pass through the acute phase without any kind of medication or anything. So it can be really helpful for that kind of reaction. it's less effective for like ongoing treatment. Like it's good for a panic attack while you're in the middle of it, but it's not really that good for something like treating anxiety that's sort of generally with you, or for treating depression that's sort of generally with you. So hypnotherapy is something that, why am I saying all these things so confidently? We study it. Like, what can it do for us? What claims should we be believing, and what claims should we be discarding? So we study these things because we want to understand them. How about rebirthing therapy? You guys might not have heard of rebirthing therapy because it's not a really popular technique anymore, largely because of this case that happened in Colorado where this teenager was, she was experiencing, oppositional defiance disorder and depression and doing some self-harm and a whole bunch of very acute things that were very, scary things. She was very unhappy. And so, it was discovered that she had been delivered through C-section, and the rebirthing movement says that people who were born C-section are more prone to psychological disorders than people who were born vaginally. Going through the birth canal does something, according to this model, that helps us to cope and whatever. I don't even know how to say exactly all the things they claim. So they were doing a rebirthing with this teenager. And the idea is you have a group of people who are all sort of lined up, like, if you can imagine a gauntlet kind of thing where there's a bunch of people all in a row, and they all have their arms wrapped around the person who's being rebirthed. And her job is to, while wrapped in blankets, or in her case, I think she was in a sleeping bag of some sort, squirm her way out like she's moving through the birth canal. And then when she emerges out the other end, she's going to have whatever benefits they think come from being born through the birth canal. And instead of being born through the birth canal, she actually smothered and died in this so-called treatment. So when we look at rebirthing therapy, first off, it has the word therapy in it. So a lot of people right away go to the idea that probably psychologists were involved in this, or people who are trained as counselors were things. Just you can call yourself a therapist with no license, no training, nothing. And so these rebirthing therapists were not psychologists. They were not people who were trained to, use this as a therapeutic technique in some kind of controlled way. It was something that they had come up with and they thought worked. And it was basic pseudoscience, right? Boy, I'm pulling out all the stuff you've learned over the quarter, pseudoscience. And so they were, advertising it, and the mother of this daughter was hoping that her daughter could, overcome the issue she was experiencing. And so she put her through this rebirthing therapy. We get tied up oftentimes in these kinds of things that have the word therapy in them. And it's almost as if you might as well be one of these people if you call yourself a psychologist. And so as a result, we go ahead and we study these things because if, we're going to be affiliated with it, we might as well understand it. We want to be able to show whether these things work or don't work. Rebirthing therapy does not work. We want to be able to give good advice to the public is basically what we're doing with this paranormal psychology research. The catch-22 of studying parapsychology, and that phrase catch-22 refers to how you're sort of, one easy way to say it is, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Like there's no real way to win in a catch-22. So the catch-22 of studying parapsychology is that while we may be able to provide evidence that supports these claims, like wouldn't that be awesome if you could find really good solid evidence that there is such a thing as clairvoyance? Like that'd be really awesome. Or you could find evidence that these things really don't work, right? Like maybe we could have good solid evidence that we could put in front of the public so that maybe they would stop using these treatments, something like that. The problem is, while we have this potential for that good outcome, we also have this potential for this bad outcome, right? Where people think somehow psychologists are approving of or associated with or just are glorified, versions of these so-called therapists. And so we get associated with this paranormal stuff. And if you're a psychology major, you may have had people asking you questions about these sort of paranormal things. And you're like, why are you even asking me about that? No, I don't study that. No, there's no class on that. What are you talking about? Right? Because in the mind of the average person, psychology gets tied up with anything that says therapy, and then, we can get associated with it. So we're sort of stuck in this catch-22. We want to study these things, and then also we end up inadvertently associated with these things. All right, I'm going to shift gears in the next lecture. So let's come back and talk a little bit about another big problem that psychology has, which is oftentimes we're labeled, outrageous, stupid research. So I'll come back to that.